Welcome to the Odd Life Podcast. That's AWED, which stands for Awake, Well, and Empowered. We're here to have conversations to inspire women of all ages to live odd AF. So thank you for joining me. Let's dig in. Hello, friends. How are you? Welcome to the last episode of the Odd Life Podcast for the year for 2024. I don't listen to a whole lot of podcasts towards the end of the year. I'm probably busy either shopping or getting last minute things done around the house. The kids are home. I don't have a lot of extra time. Maybe you're traveling and doing those kinds of things too. So chances are you're probably not listening to a ton of podcasts. So I'm not going to record anymore for the end of the year. We'll get it back up after the first of the year. A lot of podcasts right now are probably sharing some sort of self-care for the end of the year, maybe intentional planning for the next year, a lot of those kinds of things. But I want to share a story. It's about my family, my father specifically. And the reason I want to talk about it is because my best friend growing up, she just lost her mom. She lost her to dementia. They've been struggling with that for the last couple of years. And it is so sad because she was such a light. She was so much fun. She was funny. She was sarcastic. She was the kind of home that you wanted to go hang out at. My friend's parents were divorced when my friend was, I think, second or third grade. So when we started hanging out in fourth grade, her parents were already divorced. So I didn't get to experience what her life was like before that. But her mom made her home so welcoming. She let all the kids come hang out. Yeah, it just was a place to go hang. And they lived close to the high school and the junior high. So when we were in those grades, we were always hanging out at her house because it was right down the street. We could walk all the time to her house from school. And it just was a place that felt safe for me. She was the last one of 5 siblings. So it just ended up becoming us the last couple of years in high school. And we had a lot of sleepovers hanging out there. A lot of watching her mom with her friends playing cards, or she was canning vegetables or making her own jellies and jams, and she was making peanut brittle over the holidays. That woman was always doing something. She loved to dance. So she just was such a light, and to have dementia rob her of that light sucked. However, for me, dementia actually was a gift. And I'm going to explain that here in a second. So it's interesting how we can see it from different perspectives. My father was an alcoholic. And I've mentioned this many times, probably on the podcast. But if you haven't heard the story, my dad was an alcoholic, went to Vietnam, came home, was a complete mess, was probably a mess before he left, actually. I think he got kicked out of his first college because of partying too hard. And met my mom at his second college. And she did not know that he was a partier. They'd go on dates and he'd drop her off and then he'd go party afterwards. And so when he came home from Vietnam and proceeded to be a blackout drunk afterwards, it was a big eye opener for her. And so we dealt with that all growing up. When I was a junior, he went to treatment. It was one of those things where his business partners were like, either you go to treatment or you're out of the business. My mom had to give him an ultimatum as well. It was hard. I was not used to talking to my dad about how his abusive alcohol made me feel. We didn't talk about it in my house. We pretended it didn't happen. And so to actually have to say something to him, to his face, I was a mess. I could not. My father was very intimidating. And to say anything against him was really hard to do. I had to deal with all the emotions that were bottled up for all those years. I had to confront my dad, which was scary as hell. He went to treatment reluctantly. He was an asshole about it the whole time. He basically went there and was sarcastic and making shit comments the whole time. So then the third week of his month-long stay at inpatient treatment, we had to have family week, and then we had to do this all over again. We had to talk about how it made me feel, and it was horrific. Horrific. He got out of treatment. It was fine for a little while, but I don't remember. I think it was my freshman year of college. I'd come home for Christmas, and we had gone to, I think, Christmas Eve service, and then we went to dinner. And he ordered a glass of wine, and we all sat there like, "Oh my God, what are we doing? What's happening? What's happening? What's happening?" And he saw us all have a little bit of a panic on our face, and he said, "Oh, it's fine. It's no big deal. It's just one glass of wine." Well, then that started things back up again. But I was out of the house. I was in college. I didn't see it. I wasn't around it. I only came home for 2 summers after I started college, and then I didn't go home again. Then I got married, and then we moved to Kansas City shortly after getting married. And then about a year after that, we started having a family. And when my daughter was about 9 months old, my parents decided to move down to Kansas City. So then they were around, and it was fine because he focused more on the grandkids than anything else. And after a while, it became a bigger deal again, and he started to abuse it again and become an asshole to my mom even more than he already had been. He became abusive to my mom verbally. And then we noticed some weird behaviors that were happening. He was obsessed with the mail, and then he was freaked out that she would take his car to go run errands if he was home and maybe taking a nap. And his car was in the driveway. She would take his car to go do something, and he would lose his mind about her taking the car. It was like, what in the hell's going on? And then something happened, and she said, I'm done. I can't do this." And they divorced. And it wasn't until after that that we realized how far gone he was with some of the dementia. He had gone to the VA, and my mom had asked him to do a cognitive check on him, and they said he was mildly cognitive deficient. So it really wasn't a big diagnosis, just like there's a few things that are concerning, but nothing crazy. And so they didn't offer a whole lot of help. So once they got divorced and he was moved out, then we had no contact with my dad. I didn't talk to my dad a whole lot before. My mom was always the person I talked to, and then she'd fill dad in on things. That's just how it was. I didn't trust him. I didn't have him around my kids at that point because he was starting to abuse alcohol even more, and their kids were noticing it, and it was really uncomfortable for everybody. So we just kept our distance towards the end. We find out he ended up moving in with a coworker, and then left that coworker's house and went to a cousin's house. She lived here in town, lived with her. She had an extra room, and she was very sweet for him to live there. But we didn't talk to him at all. So I found out this later, and they reached out to me and said, "Hey, I think your dad's an alcoholic." I was like, "Yeah, he sure is. Been an alcoholic all my life." And they had no idea because he, of course, hid that from his side of the family, never told them. And they needed help because he was starting to have behaviors that were really concerning, like leaving the stove on, saying weird things. So the dementia was definitely becoming more apparent. He had no intentions of moving out, said he was going to move in an apartment, needed a place to stay for a couple of weeks, and then never did it. And she was very sweet to let him stay there longer, but it ended up being a couple of years. And so I started to work with the VA to see if I could get him some help, get him diagnosed, so that way we could put him in some sort of home that would help with the dementia that was showing up. Got him to the VA for this meeting, and the meeting was with all of these doctors. And when we were trying to address his financial issues, because what he would do, he would drain his account let me back up for a second. What we found out the mail thing was about, why he was obsessed with the mail, was he was sending money off to scammers. And they were promising him, if you send us this, you're going to get entered into win this big grand prize. Or they would say, if you send us this amount of money, we'll send you an amulet that will bring you riches and wealth and all this shit. So he started to believe all that. So he had all this mail, like receipts, that if he kept them, then he'd have proof that he was the winner. Like it was a receipt for him. And he would take that stuff and put it in his car. So he had random pieces of mail shoved under the seats, and if mom drove his car, then he was afraid she was going to find it and then throw all that out. Then he would have no proof if he was the winner. Like that's how far gone he was. But he kept everything very quiet. He didn't talk about anything like that. So we didn't know where his mind was at with all that. So we found this out much later. So as I'm talking to him, I'm finding out more and more about how far gone he is, talking to the VA, telling him, hey, he's spending all his money on these financial scams and alcohol. And he has no money. Every month it comes in for him Social Security benefits and a little bit of disability, and that's it. He has no savings, no nothing. Found out that he tried to go get his car repaired, couldn't pay for the repairs. So they convinced him to trade it in and get a new car, which was in itself a huge, huge crime. If you talk to my dad at all, he was by himself. If you talk to him at all, you would know something's off. If he can't pay for the repairs, how is he going to pay for a car, make a car payment every month? Bizarre. I don't know. He had zero credit. I called the dealership to complain because he has no capital now. Couldn't trade his car in for anything to try and pay for some sort of housing for him. Nothing. And so they repossessed the car that he got because he didn't make a payment. Oh my God, it was a whole thing. Anyway, so now I am talking to the VA, the medical director, trying to set this meeting up so they can make an evaluation and then give some help based on that evaluation. So we get there and he ends up answering questions of all these different doctors. And we haven't even got to the financial piece yet. And they asked him about alcohol, if he drinks alcohol. And he said no. And his cousin was there with me. Then I asked his cousin if she wanted to chime in on that. And she said, yes, he does drink alcohol. I found this and I found this and he does this. And there was a chaplain that was there. So here comes the chaplain, comes over, sits down next to us. We're around this big table. He scoots over, brings a chair over, and he starts going down the route of doing an intervention. And he says, now, do you think you'd have a better relationship with your daughter if you were not drinking and all this shit? And I'm going, no, stop. He's too far gone to even have this conversation. That's the issue, but not really. It's his mental capacity. He doesn't have one to understand financial wellness. And my dad goes, I think we're done here. Pushes back from the table and stands up. And they all look around and that's it. Once he says, I'm done talking about this, you can't make him do anything. So that was it. And we hadn't even got to the financial piece to have that question about how he's handling his finances. It was ridiculous. So fast forward, hands are tied. I don't know what to do. And his cousin and I talk a little bit and I'm like, okay, let's try and figure out maybe plan B. And she ends up talking to somebody. I don't know if it's a lawyer or maybe the police. I can't remember exactly, the sheriff. And she says, I'm going to give him a 30-day notice. And then if he doesn't leave, then they'll have to physically remove him. So that doesn't ignite him at all. I talked to him briefly and I said, hey, Dad, there's some phone numbers you can call at the VA to help you find housing. Oh, no, I've got an apartment lined up. I'm meeting somebody to get a tour. And I think I'm good to go. I'm like, you sure? Yeah, I think I'm good. Well, in case that doesn't work out, here's these numbers to the VA. And then sure enough, I get a phone call the night before he's supposed to move out. And he says, hey, can I stay with you? I've got no place to go. And I said, well, what, that apartment? Well, they didn't come through. Da, da, da. It just makes up some bullshit. And then goes off on some weird tangent about aliens and other things. And I'm thinking, oh, dear God. Oh, my gosh. So, well, these days, who knows, right? Maybe he's onto something. But ended up, like, Dad, you cannot stay with me. You, I believe, aren't safe for us to be around. And two, I don't have room for you. Every bedroom in this house is taken. We have no room. And I don't think it's good for us to do this. I said, you have the VA. There's the phone numbers I've given you to call, and they can help you out. The next day, I get a phone call first thing in the morning, and it's his cousin. My dad had a bout of diverticulitis, which is bleeding rectally. And he has had this over the years. That happens a lot when you are an alcoholic. Your intestinal lining gets very, very thin and damaged, and doesn't take much to puncture that or cause it to be inflamed and irritated. If he eats nuts or seeds or like popcorn, it irritates that and it causes bleeding. So he has bleeding, goes to the hospital, and I go there to meet them, talk to him about it. And they're going to give him a colonoscopy, but they've got to prepare him for the colonoscopy. So that's a couple days. And they're going to let him recover for a day. So it's about a 3-4 day window I have. So in the meantime, I have to go back to her place, pack up his crap, and get him ready to get out of there. And my sister's helping me at this point. My sister and my dad do not speak whatsoever. And it was on my shoulders to handle that. She was there for the kind of some background stuff, but I was dealing with him on the front end. And then when he was in the hospital, I end up telling the nurse, I said, FYI, he has no place to go after this. I'm literally going back to pack up the stuff right now. I don't know what to do with him after this. And she ends up bringing the social worker in and we start talking and she is phenomenal. And she's telling me, we'll start making some phone calls, see what we can do. Let's get Medicaid forms filled out because he's dirt poor. Let's do these things. And in the meantime, maybe you can reach out to the VA and see what they can do. So I called the local Kansas City VA. They suck. They're the ones that screwed up the meeting in the first place. I called Leavenworth, which is a different VA within about 45 minutes of here on the Kansas side. And I talked to medical director there. And again, this is all in a matter of like 2-3 days. I am freaking out. So this is like a Saturday morning. He goes in the hospital. So it's like Sunday prep, Monday prep. I think maybe he has a colonoscopy that day and it's now Tuesday and he's done and he's kind of just recovering. And since we have no place for him to go, the social worker is letting him stay in the patient recovery area. I mean, my dad's dressed in normal clothes, hanging out in the recovery area at this point. They're working with me and helping. And it was the biggest godsend ever. So finally, the Leavenworth hospital says there's a memory care center attached to the VA in Topeka, which is an hour west of us. So I reach out to them. There's a process to go through, fill an application out. So I get one of those faxed to the hospital. I'm filling it all out. In the meantime, I get my dad, I kind of swindle him to get me on his checking account so I can see how much money he's got on there and find out he has basically zero. So we had to have that information in order to fill out some of these forms, especially Medicaid. And holy crap. And then they actually had, which was fantastic, there's a medical doctor that was there at the hospital that finally did an evaluation of my dad and deemed him incapable of making financial medical decisions for himself. So they gave me that power of attorney at that point in time. And I filled out some paperwork and got it all taken care of. So I ended up being someone that could be filled in on what's going on with him. Thank God. So then I fill this application out for the dementia center out in Topeka. I send it to them and she's like, well, our director's out for a couple of days. She'll be back on Friday and we'll let you know as soon as we can about if he's been chosen. So again, he is there hanging out at the hospital. I get a phone call Friday. Meantime, I'm going back and forth to his cousin's house to pack up his room. There's boxes of unopened mail and open mail, and he's kept it all. And I can't just throw it out because there's sometimes money in there. There's checks that he's tried to send and didn't end up sending it. I have to make sure those are getting shredded. There's cash in some things. It's just insane. And Friday afternoon, as I'm at his cousin's house doing the packing with my sister, I get a phone call from Topeka and they say, we've chosen your dad. And I bawled like a baby because it was an absolute freaking miracle that this all happened within a week. And thank God for that social worker at St. Luke South here in Overland Park. I don't know what we would have done with him. I picked him up the following Monday. So he was there an entire week, you guys, an entire week. I get him to this VA memory care center. And I find out from the director, I meet her finally, and she said, I actually had 3 applications on my desk when I came back, and I chose your dad's. They only had 1 bed left. They only had 12 beds total. They happened to have one available, and they chose my dad. So it was insane. Prayers were answered, to say the least. And I told them, basically, I had to lie to them and tell them, we're going to have you here until you're physically kind of back to normal. They're going to be able to monitor you and all these different things. So I lied to him to get him there. And he was there for 4 years. The first couple of years were fine. I think it was 2017 when he went in, December 2017. And he was there for 2 years, and then COVID hit in his 3rd year there. And that sucked because he really went downhill and he couldn't see us and talk to us, and things were confusing for him. And then he passed away January 2021. And the reason why I said his dementia was a gift was because my dad and I had a shit relationship for a very long time. He was not a good father. We got very small glimpses of who he was as a real person. The rest was either he was an alcoholic, he was abusive, he was rude, he was manipulative, lying, all that kind of stuff. Not around most of the time. When the kids were younger, he would go to work and come by the house after the kids had woken up from their naps, and he would hang out, and that was fine. But it was a very superficial relationship. When my parents divorced, there was no contact for a couple of years. And then when I had to have contact with him, it was me trying to help him and just get him where he needed to go. So by having him in there, slowly but surely, he started to forget about stuff. I forgot the mail, about all the money he had lost because we threw all these receipts away that he was going to be the winner. And eventually, he was not bringing up the past, not talking about my mom or my sister and the things she did to him he didn't like. He ended up talking about the very far back. He would talk about his childhood, about Vietnam sometimes, friends years ago, that kind of stuff. So we started to have more of a normal relationship. I would go visit him. I would take him to the Walgreens to get some supplies, or I would take him to go get him maybe a new shirt, new pair of sweatpants, some slippers, that kind of stuff. And I'd take him to lunch, and he'd be so grateful and so happy to see me, big hugs, brag about me and to his other little, resident neighbors there. He had pictures of the grandkids all in his display case, and I had all of his war medals. And so he would show people his grandkids in the display case, and he'd go for walks. They let him do some walking by himself at the very beginning, and they gave him a little Fitbit and a tracker so they make sure he wasn't wandering off. Uh, but they loved him there, and he was jokey and kind of the fun guy he used to be years ago. And then I got him some art supplies and paints, and whenever I'd show up, he would have maybe a coloring page for me to take home to the kids, or he started painting something, he would show me. I bought him plants to take care of. He was into lawn care and all that kind of stuff. So plants for him are kind of second nature. And so we had these little conversations, and we actually started to repair our relationship. I got a chance to know him in a totally different way. When I would leave, he would wave and he would cry. He'd be so happy to see me. If my boys at all were playing in Topeka for baseball, I would go pick him up and bring him to the games. Again, that's only the first couple of years, because by the year 3, it was COVID and none of that stuff was happening. So, and I couldn't take him anywhere. But we had decent conversations, and he was so happy to see me. And when he actually passed away because he had a diverticulitis bout. Again, he had fallen asleep on the couch in the main living area, and they were going to check on him and make sure he was okay, because again, really close to be lunchtime, I think. And they noticed there was blood on the seat next to him. And we decided that he had gotten so far down the road of his dementia, he was having some hallucinations and some really bizarre things. He thought one of his neighbors down the hallway had kidnapped me and is holding me in his room. So pretty far gone. And we decided that if anything happened to him physically, we are not going to take him out of the memory care center and take him to a hospital. He doesn't know anybody. It would be almost cruel to keep trying to extend his life. So we decided he would just be there, and we would do everything we can to make him comfortable at the end. So I show up there, and he's still somewhat cognizant. He's awake a little bit, and we just say a few things to each other. And in the meantime, he's on his side, I'm holding his hand, and he's humming to himself. And I know that humming, from what I've understood, is it's a self-soothing coping tool people do. And he's humming to himself. And by the end of the day, he's still kind of with me. And I go home, and the next day I come back, and now he's completely out, and he is heavily sedated. They notice by the way he clenches his fists if he's in pain. So they keep upping his painkillers to then help that relax. And by that second day, he was showing signs of he's getting ready to go. And my daughter, in the meantime, which is really crazy, she was at soccer practice. She was 3 hours away. And our coach said, "What's going on? What, you seem out of it?" She's like, "Oh, my grandfather's, and he's dying, and it's hard to focus, and it's going to happen. I'm waiting for my mom to call." And he's like, "Just go down there. Just go home. Go see him. If you can possibly get down there, just go be with your family." So she gets there just in time. She literally is pulling in the parking lot, and there's signs that he's get ready to go. And call my husband, "Guys, come in here." And so they walk in right as he's taking his last breath. And we were all able to be with him, my husband and my daughter, holding his hand. And it was a very peaceful moment for all of us. Sad, but very peaceful, knowing he's no longer suffering and he can be normal again. But for me, his dementia was a gift, because he forgot all the other shit and became a different person at the end. My best friend, her mom, she was robbed of some great end of her life moments and memories because of what this freaking disease does. And I got to have some great moments with my dad. And it's crazy how that can be seen as a gift, but it was for me. So maybe you've had the same situation as I have. If you've had a shit relationship with your parent over the years and they are diagnosed with dementia, you may get the chance to heal that relationship because of that disease. It's crazy to say, but it really helped me find peace with it. I was able to tell him things. I was able to tell him I loved him. And he was very different at the end. He was remorseful about a lot of things. He went to church every Sunday, took a couple of his buddies with him. One was a quadriplegic, and he would wheel him down the hall to go to the chapel and make sure he had communion every week. Very loving guy at the end. And I see that as a gift. So I don't really know how to wrap this up, but if you have a similar situation with the parents and they have dementia, see it as a gift. Write it out with them, and you'll be amazed at maybe how different you're going to feel at the end than how you felt your entire relationship with this parent. Because if you've got a lot of anger and a lot of resentment and bad memories with that parent, them getting diagnosed with dementia might actually be a good thing for you. It sounds weird, but it really helped bring me some peace and closure to that relationship. So I don't know, kind of a random thing to talk about, but I was thinking about this because of my friend and how she didn't not have that at the end. She lost her mom at the last couple of years because she was no longer the same person. And we loved who she was her whole life. And I had the opposite. It's kind of crazy, but as Forrest Gump says, that's all I got to say about that. Hope that's not a bummer of an episode, but I wanted to share that because I think a lot of us maybe are in that stage of life where we're starting to deal with aging parents and it's going to suck. But if I can offer a little bit of a silver lining for some of you, that would be it. Okay. You guys, don't mean for this to be a bummer episode or a downer, but there's something very beautiful about being with your parent at the end of their life and you're able to be there with them when they pass. I can only imagine how scary that is on that end of things, especially if they're in a medical crisis, they don't know what's happening. And to see somebody that they know they love with them, I think that's really important. Okay, on to other things. Enjoy the rest of your year. I will see you in 2025, God willing, and I will catch up with you soon. If you want to connect outside of the podcast, you guys go over to Substack. It's the link in the show notes. We can go hang out there. You can subscribe for free to get my articles and my weekly newsletter. But we have a private chat. If we get some people that are interested, I would love to have some monthly just meetup calls where we get on Zoom and we meet each other and have some great conversation. I want to have conversation after the podcast in the chat, whatever we can do to connect. I just really want other women to find each other that are trying to live awake, well, and empowered. And I'm hoping that space will offer that for you. So come hang out with me over there. All right, you guys have a great rest of your year, and we'll see you in 2025. Love you all. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you found this episode either helpful, inspiring, entertaining, or just made you feel less alone. Or maybe all of those things. If so, I'd love it if you'd share this episode with a friend, as well as on your social media. And if I dare ask for more, to rate and review the podcast on your favorite platform, especially Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You see, the more reviews we have, the more people we can reach, and the bigger the Odd Life community can become. You guys are the best. I can't wait to chat again next week, so we'll see you then.